Well, shit. Is it that time of year already? I swear it comes earlier every year. That magical time between New Year's and Valentine's Day where we all get together to spread discontent and violently overthrow democracy. It's been a year since the insurrection at the Capitol, which even with the slow time warp of the pandemic seems genuinely shocking, mostly because it feels like it occurred yesterday and a decade ago simultaneously. It goes down in history as one of those where were you when it happened moments, like 9/11 or that time Elon got blazed on Rogan. Blazing aside, I'll never forget where I was that day, because even before the riot, I was entrenched in a situation that literally terrified me to my very core. Yeah, I'm talking about my regularly scheduled dental cleanings. Surviving the apocalyptic torture device that is the dentist had prepared me for anything the day could throw at me. I guess that's what facing your worst fears will do for you.
Well, turns out the only thing I'm more afraid of than dentistry is the violent overthrow of American democracy. And Danny DeVito.
I remember the first 20 seconds back in my living room. I could hear commotion on the TV, but didn't really make out what was happening. And even when I finally looked up and saw the Chiron declaring tear gas deployed amid pro-Trump protest, it took a full minute for me to actually process what was happening. Because this doesn't happen here. The images were surreal, and the pace at which they came was so fast and so furious that it was difficult to do anything other than sit and watch it unfold. Over the next few hours, many now well-known characters would appear. Asshole Pelosi guy, the QAnon shaman dude, literal superhero Eugene Goodman. But I'm not sure if there's any moment that will be more ingrained in my mind than the shooting and subsequent death of Ashley Babbitt. The story is well known at this point. Babbitt was born in California in what was described as an apolitical home. She was a veteran of 2 wars, a small business owner, and a former proponent of President Barack Obama. Somewhere along the way, and in an alarmingly short period of time, Babbitt's entire worldview radically altered. She went from being a Capitol Guardian, the nickname of the unit she was stationed in, tasked with protecting Washington, D.C., to being at the forefront of an attack against it. Babbitt's death should have been to the rise in fanatical nationalism what the Manson murders were to the free love movement. It should have been our worst fears confirmed, followed by an immediate sobering. How does this happen? Who's to blame? Well, one of my earliest memories is of cartoon John Rambo sleeping in a canoe, just trying to get some damn peace before a chopper pulls into the tranquil lakeside to summon him for his adventure of the week.
Rambo, your country needs you.
Always with the helicopters. Also, kind of hilarious this was even a cartoon. You really gotta love the Stranger Danger, Reagan's America that took countless R-rated properties of the decade and repackaged them into Saturday morning cartoons solely to peddle toys to kids. Actually, come to think about it, Rambo Force of Freedom was a daily cartoon. They couldn't even wait until Saturday morning to Season of the Witch your kids.
Goes on, it means the death of millions of people, everyone watching. Don't you understand that? Hey, it's a bomb, then say whatever you want. For God's sake, please stop it. There's one more time.
Rambo.
Now, I feel like it's as good a time as any to make a confession.
I'm a child of the 90s, one of those bastard millennials with Gen X siblings. And they're Rambo? So this was the Rambo that I grew up with. Sure, we had our humble beginnings with canoes and helicopters, but to me, John Rambo was...
I made it 30 years without watching First Blood, figuring it was more of the same.
So I couldn't have been more stunned when I sat down to watch First Blood for the first time. I would have said it stunned into silence, except that I literally kept talking every 3 minutes, much to my wife's annoyance. This film felt like a revelation. A far cry from, you know. First Blood was released in October of 1982, directed by Ted Kotcheff and with a script co-written by Sylvester Stallone himself. First Blood tells the tale of former Green Beret officer John Rambo, 6 years after the fall of Saigon, officially ending the Vietnam War. When first we meet our hero, he's an unemployed drifter with seemingly nothing and no one. He searches for an old war buddy by the name of Delmar Berry. The first scene finds John as he approaches the Berry family home, where upon arriving, he meets Delmar's mother, who informs him that her son died last year.
Delmar's gone.
What time will he be back?
He died.
What?
Died last summer.
Died how?
Cancer. Brought it back from Nam. All that orange stuff that spread it around.
Rambo realizes that he's the last of a brotherhood forged by the fires of war. Delmar, Westmore, Bronson, Danforth, and Ortega are all gone. I say their names now because the film makes a point to repeat them at least 3 times, as if by repeating their names, carrying the weight of their deaths, Rambo won't allow them to be forgotten, even if society at large would like nothing more than to forget. The opening does so much with so little. We understand who Rambo is and who he was. We know what's important to him and what he's seeking, which is just someone to help carry the burden. Following this prologue of sorts, we begin the actual story of First Blood. John Rambo walks past a welcome sign of a small mountain town in the Pacific Northwest called, in a blink and you'll miss it moment of on-the-noseness, Hope, Washington. Almost immediately, Rambo's mere presence in town is enough to garner unwarranted police harassment. And this isn't your usual bread tube police bashing. These cops are literally bad, like cartoonishly bad even.
Hey, if you're looking for trouble, you came to the right place, buddy.
Down, God damn it!
Art, what the hell is going on down here?
The only one with even some semblance of morals is Sheriff William Teasel, whose initial overreaction to Rambo being in Hope to begin with acts as the inciting incident for the events to follow. Sheriff Teasel spots Rambo wandering through a small mountain town and proceeds to stop him. Again, basically just for existing, but then he offers him a ride. This isn't some small town hospitality, though, as he drives Rambo to the edge of town to make sure that the unwanted element steers clear of townsfolk, denying him even the right to eat. When Rambo rightfully asks why he's the subject of such ire, Sheriff Teasel doesn't hold back.
We don't want guys like you in this town. Drifters. First thing you know, we got a whole bunch of guys like you in this town. That's why.
Dejected and rejected, Rambo contemplates moving on before he crosses the bridge and back into Hope. This act of defiance in the face of a corrupt authority is the progenitor of things to come in future Rambo films that are far less admirable in their execution or their intentions. But here, in this moment, it's John Rambo declaring himself a human being, not just one with certain inalienable rights, but one that shed blood, lost brothers, and by the time of the film, himself in order to protect those rights. Seeing this, Sheriff Teasel, in the first but certainly not last display of authoritarian overreach, literally threatens to draw his service revolver on Rambo. This leads to a tense but brief struggle before Rambo, whose entire adult life has been about submitting to figures of authority, reluctantly agrees to go quietly to the police station, where we meet a cavalcade of underachieving high school peakers who inexplicably are super into the mistreatment of prisoners. Said mistreatment causes Rambo to have a PTSD episode, in which he fights back and escapes the precinct. The pursuing hunt, featuring a small detour through the Cliffs of Insanity,
See? The Cliffs of Insanity!
gives us the first in what is to become a franchise staple, a helicopter battle sequence, which in this instance leads to the death of an officer. It's hilarious. And for all intents and purposes, Rambo begins to wage a war with the local and state police. It's a war we know can't be won. Rambo is once again in a no-win, untenable position, and yet it's framed to us in such a way that we have to believe there's a chance he'll overcome the odds. Remember the good old days when abusive cop equaled bad?
What's that? Oh, I'm being told by my producer that time never existed.
Along the way, Rambo's former commanding officer, Colonel Sam Troutman, comes to town and tries to dissuade and warn the police against pursuit of Rambo, warning them of the potentially volatile scenario.
Strictly speaking, he slipped up. You're lucky to be breathing.
That's just great. Colonel, you came out here to find out why one of your machines blew a gasket.
You don't seem to want to accept the fact that you're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare.
As they pursue him into the wilderness and away from civilization, now in his element, Rambo begins to pick them off one by one.
I could have killed them all. I could have killed you. In town, you're the law. Out here, it's me. Don't push it.
When the police call in reinforcements in retaliation, Rambo narrowly avoids death on multiple occasions until this all culminates in a one-man raid upon the police station. Where on the verge of killing Sheriff Teasel for his many evil deeds, Rambo is confronted in person by Troutman.
Rambo! Rambo, don't do it!
The moment Rambo is afforded someone's attention rather than their scorn, he immediately breaks down under the tremendous weight of trauma and profound grief he carries with him each day.
I had a friend, was the Air Force. I had all these guys, man. Back there, I had all these fighting guys who were my friends. Because back here, there's nothing.
Having finally been heard, Rambo's rage dissipates, but his grief does not. This war, like the previous, is over. And like the last one, Rambo is surrounded by the ghost of war wherever he goes. The precinct scenes are some of my favorite in the entire film. They're filled with small details that not only enhance the themes of the story, but highlight the stark differences between our characters and their respective worldviews. For instance, the officers in Rambo both wear American flags on their jackets. His is faded, dirty, and tattered, while theirs are bright and pristine. A juxtapositional mirror image that simultaneously expresses the literal implications of Rambo's experience at war compared to those who stayed home, and how those who stayed home perceived returning vets. The anti-military stigma was real.
Wait, but was it?
Very quick aside, I'm almost positive that on an anecdotal level there was absolutely some anti-military sentiments thrown around for returning veterans, but this widespread belief that veterans were spat upon and called murderers by society at large is, well, how do I say this? This appears to be a case of informal accounts being perpetuated and then cultivated through pop cultural depictions of returning veterans. From dramatic portrayals...
No problem, Mom. I'm not dead. I gotta live. I gotta live and I gotta roll around. I gotta remind him of Vietnam. And you don't want to know. You don't want to see us. You want to hide us. You want to hide us because it is a can of shit.
To comedic ones.
Boys, how was school today?
I threw a bunch of Grandpa Chip's war medals off the bridge.
That sounds like a good day.
Just somewhere in between.
Well, thought I'd try out my sea legs.
Well, you ain't got no legs, Lieutenant Dane.
The truth is obviously more complex than that, dealing with a multitude of factors, from the war itself already being very unpopular compared to the nearly unanimous public support when confronted with the unambiguous and existential threat of the Nazis, to socioeconomic realities faced for returning veterans. After World War II, troops returned home, bought houses, went to college, had families, and were largely accepted with open arms by a country and labor force brimming with opportunity. The same can't be said for vets returning from Vietnam, who faced a sluggish job market, resource crises such as oil and steel, and, of course, the great inflation of the 1970s, which, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, approximately 2.3 million jobs were lost, the most since the Great Depression. At times, I think the lack of a hero's welcome by the country and the government itself gets misplaced into thinking that the everyday citizen was anti-vet, because at its heart, this film lays that out. Returning veterans and anti-war protesters were often in lockstep in their disdain for the war.
Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal, 8 Air Medals,
national defense and the rest of this garbage. It doesn't mean a thing.
Proof that the alleged spitting acts actually occurred might take the form of photographs or film in which we were able to clearly identify who is spitting on whom. This will be the most credible type of evidence. GIs returned from Vietnam heavily armed with Pentax cameras bought at base PXs, so it is likely that such photos would exist if spitting had occurred with the frequency now believed. The records in which we might expect to find such reports are available to researchers. For example, the Special Committee on Demonstration Observation was established by the Bar Association of the City of New York in the 1970s. The committee, with the cooperation of police and anti-war groups, sent members of the bar to demonstrations and marches specifically to observe and report on the behavior of the police and demonstrators. Their reports, filed with police at the time, are available from the library of the Bar Association. These reports contain not a hint of hostility between anti-war activists and the military personnel or veterans. Indeed, some of the reports note the participation of Vietnam veterans in the demonstrations, supplying still more evidence of solidarity between veterans and the anti-war movement. Jeremy Lemke, The Spitting Image, Myth, Memory, and the Legacy of Vietnam.
While the myth of the spat upon veteran is, well, just that, one aspect that I feel is shown with sincere fidelity is the depiction of post-traumatic stress disorder, not just the manifestation of the PTSD itself, but the response from others in the presence of it. I'm reminded of the quote by Elaine Scarry, "To have great pain is to have certainty. To hear that another person has pain is to have doubt." Pain that we can observe with our eyes tends to garner more sympathy than, say, mental illness, certainly more comprehension. In his work, The Body Keeps the Score, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains,
What Gardner called traumatic neuroses, today we call post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Gardner noted that sufferers from traumatic neurosis develop a chronic vigilance for and sensitivity to threat. His summation especially caught my eye. The nucleus of the neurosis is a psychoneurosis. In other words, post-traumatic stress isn't all in one's head, as some people suppose, but has a psychological basis. Gardner understood, even then, that the symptoms have their origin in the entire body's response to the original trauma.
PTSD is a physiological response, a reflex, involuntary. Let's remember that aspect as we slide into Rambo 2 and 3's DMs later. When the cops begin to treat him in a dehumanizing and torturous fashion, the body and the brain are literally having trouble differentiating between a POW camp and regular incarceration in the United States. Because in this specific moment, there isn't a discernible difference to Rambo. And any pro-coppers out there, I think, would have their hands filled trying to defend the dehumanization accusation. They refer to Rambo as an animal, as a machine, as anything other than a human being deserved of basic decency. To be fair, the fault may not entirely be at the feet of the police officers. Don't get me wrong, I'm not defending their reprehensible behavior in the precinct, but I will note that even today, PTSD is a bit of a mystery to the everyday citizen. And back then, it was still only spoken of in whispers and by many names. As Dr. Bessel van der Kolk again explains, it didn't appear to be high on anyone's priority list.
I went down to the medical library to look for books on war neurosis, shell shock, battle fatigue, or any other terms or diagnosis I could think of that might shed light on my patients. To my surprise, the library at the VA didn't have a single book about any of these conditions. 5 years after the last American soldier left Vietnam, the issue of wartime trauma was still not on anybody's agenda.
To call the way in which police are depicted in this film as prescient would be akin to calling Simone Biles an okay athlete with some minor success. You know, people make a big to-do about Nostradamus predicting Hitler in 9/11, which he didn't, or The Simpsons for predicting, everything, but not enough love goes to a film released in 1982 that not only accurately predicts the militaristic escalation of law enforcement today, but also how brazenly aggressive those police would become when given access to their new toys free from any fear of punitive recourse. Rambo faces off with choppers, nearly gets blown up by bazookas, and squares off with a seemingly never-ending supply of resources meant to keep him down and uphold the law. We see law enforcement officers nearly shoot into public thoroughfares.
Shoot! Mark, come on! Shoot! There's people down there!
Shoot at an unarmed man with his arms outstretched in surrender.
I didn't do anything!
And repeatedly break the law in order to enforce it. And while the law may be sacrosanct in their ideologies, it certainly isn't in their actions.
If one of my deputies gets out of line with a prisoner, then the prisoner comes to me with it. And if I find out it's like he says, I kicked the deputy's ass. Me. The law. That's the way it's gotta be. People start fucking around with the law and all hell breaks loose.
Except those who write those laws. Except those who enforce them. In the end, Rambo did just go a little bit off the deep end of domestic terrorism, yet he comes off unjustly vilified and a victim. He's held accountable in a way that the lawmakers and politicians that send poor farm kids off to war, or the law enforcement officers who perpetuate poor policing practices rarely ever are. It's a bittersweet ending that feels shockingly authentic to life, true to the idea that individuals are largely ineffective in the face of large machines and systems. It's a film solely interested in the failings of American institutions. The military fails its mission. The government fails to provide adequate assistance for returning veterans. The police fail to uphold their oaths as stewards of the law. The highest compliment I can pay First Blood is that it felt like a film of our current times and urgencies.
All right. I guess we gotta talk about these other Rambo films.
I knew what I got myself into when I started this, except I totally didn't. This video was meant to be 15 minutes, and maybe in a better writer's hands it would be, but then I watched all of these Rambo movies, and
there's a lot.
In the interest of time, we're not going to explore every nook and cranny of these films because they're all nook and cranny. Okay, opening shot, giant explosion. It probably should have been an early omen, but the opening scene of Rambo 2 is actually very interesting. We begin with John Rambo now in what appears to be a literal chain gang, turning big rocks into smaller ones. Colonel Troutman arrives and offers Rambo a way out.
You can't possibly want to stay here for another 5 years.
In here, at least I know where I stand.
The opening 3 minutes of the film are very promising. It plays with the idea that prison, like the military, is the kind of rigid, highly structured system that allows someone like Rambo to thrive, albeit at the expense of their freedom. Rambo actually appears to be at peace, and he refuses the call for about 10 seconds before Colonel Troutman convinces him to once again go back into his own personal hell. Quick aside, what the shit? James Cameron co-wrote this. Well, turns out yes and kind of no. He wrote a version entitled First Blood Part 2, The Mission, that was heavily rewritten by Sly, but between this, Piranha 2, and Aliens, my hopes of a Titanic 2 are at an all-time high. So Rambo and Troutman fly to Thailand where they meet up with Major Marshall Murdoch, who looks like an amalgam of every villain you've ever seen in an early 2000s Disney live-action film. There's not even an attempt to pretend that he'll be anything other than an oppositional force deployed when needed for plot purposes. But, whatever, Napier's a good actor. It's here where we are finally given the details of the mission and set up the stakes of the film. Years after the war, it is believed that American POWs are still being held captive. So naturally, they brought in one of the best killers the military ever created in for a rescue mission, right? We're just going to let Rambo do his thing, no questions asked, right? Wrong. He's told not to engage or rescue or do anything other than simply investigate the potential location of said POWs and take pictures. So you bring the greatest badass in the world, a man who has just very clearly suffered some sort of nervous breakdown. You spring him from his prison sentence for domestic terrorism and say, hey guy, take pictures. This is absurd for so many reasons. First and most apparent is the fact that Rambo shouldn't be allowed anywhere near any actual kind of sanctioned or unsanctioned military action. But if you insist, if you can't help yourself to have a slice of that John Rambo pie, you keep the guy on the bench? There's nothing about this assignment that only Rambo could do. It's an assignment for literally anyone. Anyone could have done this assignment. I mean, was there a deleted scene in the Cameron draft that explained that before Vietnam, Rambo really wanted to be a photographer? Did he spend most of senior year in the darkroom at Headband High? What justification was there to bring an unstable veteran into a situation which is fraught with peril and the kind of literal triggers that could ignite a repeat of the first film? And the film seems to be aware how insane his inclusion is. And there's even a scene where Murdoch, the bureaucrat guy, where he goes to Troutman and has a little aside asking if this guy is okay. And Troutman basically goes, it's the kind of lazy and lackadaisical plotting that makes this feel so manufactured and entirely inauthentic. It's not like First Blood is so much more plausible than First Blood Part 2 in terms of the action, just that the initial premise of a tortured veteran being ignored by society and drifting through life like a ghost is, in fact, quantifiably real. It allows us to suspend disbelief a bit more. It allows us to feel that despair. First Blood Part 2 falters almost immediately precisely because we know that the government wouldn't turn back to their defective property in a time of need, not even to exploit them. Because to exploit them is to acknowledge them. This essentially ends the first act, and while nothing too egregious happens, it's also the last sign of any of the more subtle moments the first film is filled with. Pretty much everything following this belongs in a separate category, a bizarro Superman version of Rambo that I affectionately refer to as Ron Jambo. And Ron Jambo, he has a weird, distorted sense of American values and patriotism. The end of the first act is the final time in the franchise where if you squint, you could misconstrue it having a critical eye pointed at the core of American society rather than the other. Like most covert missions planned and carried out by the United States government, things go sideways almost immediately. During his insertion, Rambo's parachute malfunctions and causes him to lose all of his weapons and equipment save for his hunting knife and his bow and arrows. At the first sign of failure, Murdoch almost immediately tries to pull the plug on the whole operation.
Erickson, abort the mission. Pull out. It'll kill him. He'll be torn apart.
What I find most interesting is the role that Troutman plays and also being shocked by the callousness of the establishment. Where in the first film, even if Troutman does truly care about Rambo, he's still a part of that establishment. This is the first shift from viewing all American failures on all Americans into a bureaucrat equals bad dichotomy. Rambo makes it. And now behind enemy lines, Rambo is introduced to his intelligence contact, a young Vietnamese freedom fighter by the name of Co Bao. I wonder if that name means anything. My God. So leaving the obvious aside, this is an example of a pervasive problem that begins to manifest itself in the franchise more apparently, which is the franchise has a touch of the yellow peril fever. It portrays all of Asia monolithically. Apparently no Asians use articles in their speech, and Asian depiction in general amounts to burlesque. This is exemplified by the casting of Julia Nixon as Ko Bao to begin with, who was born in Singapore to an English father and a Chinese mother, both decidedly not Vietnamese, but, you know, who cares? This entire production sees it fit to use different cultures interchangeably. And this could be seen as me looking too deeply into things, but I find it interesting that hate crimes against Asian Americans skyrocketed during the pandemic and the Trump administration. Perhaps this shift started earlier than even I imagined. Co arranges for them to travel upriver, where we get this truly mind-blowing sequence where Rambo and Stallone himself basically name-check a franchise that won't be born for another 30 years.
Is that why they pick you? Because you like to fight?
I'm expendable.
Expendable. What mean expendable?
Like, did you know, Sly?
Or did you know even then?
Rambo and Bag Lady find the camp and infiltrate in direct violation of stated orders because, of course, and instead of taking pictures, Rambo directly engages with the enemy before freeing a soldier and attempting to get him to the extraction point. They're betrayed by the river pirates, and this forces Rambo to channel his hatred of choppers into boats. At the extraction point, Rambo wards off the encroaching enemy as the helicopter arrives. The pilot informs Murdoch that Rambo hasn't just taken pictures and that a POW and himself are awaiting extraction, to which point Murdoch tells them to abort the rescue because Rambo violated orders. Once again, bureaucrat cowardly leaving behind soldiers. Confronted by Troutman, Murdoch explains why.
It was a lie, wasn't it? Just like the whole damn war. It was a lie.
What are you talking about?
That camp was supposed to be empty. Rambo goes in, a decorated vet. He finds no POWs. The Congress buys it, case closed. And if he happens to get caught, nobody knows he's alive except you and your computers. And you can reprogram that, can't you?
Who the hell do you think you're talking to, Troutman?
A stinking bureaucrat that's trying to cover his ass.
No, not just mine, Troutman. We're talking about a nation's.
And this is the point in the film where I felt like I was having a goddamn fever dream. I mean, this is more or less attempting to say the same ideas as First Blood, what with bureaucratic and institutional failures. a schism between those who get their hands dirty and those who don't, but with zero self-criticism aside from shallow synecdoches of power. To quote David Byrne, "You're talking a lot, but you're not saying anything." First Blood felt agonizing because we had no one else to blame. This film is agonizing because it appears the entire idea is basically, sure, we messed up, but what about the Ruskies and Charlie? And besides, only bureaucrats do evil in the name of America. And when bureaucrat fails, take matters into your own hands. Can't imagine anything going wrong there. It's the epitome of mistakes were made. The acknowledgement of said mistakes is framed as an abstraction that allows the speaker to admit wrongdoing while accepting no blame for it. It's almost not worth going into the rest of the film because it plays out predictably. Rambo and the POW are returned and tortured. Rambo pretends to cooperate and communicates with HQ. He breaks free, but not before issuing a stark warning to Murdoch.
Murdoch. I'm coming to get you.
And the rest of the film is basically a large action sequence with the usual suspects. Exploding buildings, exploding people, exploding helicopters, exploding hearts. And then Rambo single-handedly brings the boys back home. And mirroring the first film again, the emotional climax is Rambo facing off with the corrupt authority. Only this time, Rambo doesn't need to be coaxed out of it. He no longer needs to be restrained because the film doesn't admonish his behavior. It actively encourages it.
Find him, or I'll find you.
Having once again gone through a war to earn his freedom, Rambo finds himself with a full pardon, and Troutman tries to convince him to finally return home. Rambo refuses, prompting Troutman to ask point blank,
And what is it you want?
I want what they want. And every other guy who came over here and spilt his guts and gave everything he had once for our country to love us as much as we love it.
And then he just sort of walks off into the Thailand wilderness without money or resources or a shirt. And even though he's walking away with his quote-unquote freedom, it leaves Rambo a victim of a different kind. He's reduced to a mouthpiece for lofty but ultimately empty American rhetoric. PTSD is never mentioned in the film. It's never represented visually or alluded to audibly. It is a defining characteristic in First Blood, and it is wholly absent in its sequel. What takes its place is dangerous rhetoric and misplaced blame. Rambo 2 is so profoundly far-fetched and its premise is so disingenuous that you couldn't arrive at it, even if your sole intent was to parody. Which brings me to the parodies. Before we continue down this Rambo rabbit hole, name of my new band by the way, I think people of a certain age are more familiar with Rambo from the countless parodies than they are by the actual film franchise itself. From Gremlins to Hot Shots, UHF to Family Guy to Family Guy, it's just a bunch of Family Guy. It's a testament to the franchise for having the kind of pop cultural staying power that so few films and franchises ever achieve. Just looking at 1982 alone, First Blood was released in the same year as in E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which themselves have seen innumerable parodies. I'm not angry with Rambo's success in staying in our pop cultural lexicon, but I'm a bit disheartened that it's not the thoughtful, meditative John Rambo of First Blood that makes up the overwhelming majority of these. Of course, it makes sense. I mean, the John Rambo in First Blood isn't some caricature in which to be lampooned. He's a real person. Which is why you never see that film get parodied. Essentially, every parody takes its inspiration and aesthetic from the subsequent installments. In fact, unlike to be a Rambo parody, you usually only need someone shirtless, wearing a red bandana, and wielding a ridiculously oversized assault weapon. It's a low bar to hurdle, and it's sad because the parody does what the franchise did to itself following its wonderful debut. It reduces the real pain and trauma of the veteran, it absolves the country that turned its back on the veteran, and fetishizes the total war aspect of latter installments without ever paying attention to the why. Pop culture osmosis is, for the most part, a beautiful thing. It's a bridge from generation to generation. This phenomena allows young kids to quote films and TV shows they haven't experienced yet. My nephews have yet to watch Star Wars, but they will often call me and say, "I am your father." And I calmly reply back,
It's not true. That's impossible.
It's a type of currency between us, between the years that separate our age, between the seeing and unseeing, the experienced and inexperienced. When I ask if either of them know who Rambo is, they replied, "The guy who blows things up?" And in a way, they're right. In a more specific way, they're 100% right. Because the legacy of Rambo is/will be determined more so by the parodies and cultural osmosis than it ever could be by the first film.
Well, all right. Rambo 3. We really crossed the Rubicon on this one.
We're going to blaze through this like Rambo blazes through The Enemy, because despite an hour and 41-minute runtime and a disquieting lack of Kurtwood Smith, there's maybe 5 minutes of interesting ideas accidentally broached by this film. Okay, so we begin Rambo 3 back in Thailand.
Actually, you know what? Wait, I've put this off as long as I could.
Rambo has the dubious distinction of being the most confusingly titled franchise in film history. It seems deceptively simple, but, there was First Blood, then Rambo First Blood Part 2, which is named Rambo, but makes it a point to let you know that it's quote-unquote thematically connected to First Blood. Then there's Rambo 3, despite there never having officially been a Rambo 2. So Rambo 3 can either be considered Rambo 1 or Rambo 2, or, in a weird circumstance, First Blood Part 3, but not actually Rambo 3. This only gets more confusing when we jump to 2008's Rambo, which I believe was originally entitled John Rambo, but I guess it was hit with like a Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat marketing kerfuffle after the fact, and now it's just Rambo. So just to be clear, we're talking about the Rambo film released in 1988, which is called Rambo 3, but is actually Rambo 2 or First Blood Part 3, but not actually Rambo 3, because technically Rambo 4 is Rambo 3, or it's Rambo 1. Okay, I hurt myself. I have a headache. We begin Rambo 3 back in Thailand. Rambo has settled into a nice, quiet life of Thai fight clubs and monastery construction jobs. The credits show us Troutman and Kurtwood Smith walking through crowds looking for our titular character. He's revealed to them and us, the audience, with the sexiest fucking turnaround in cinematic history. I mean, seriously, eat your fucking heart out, Jessica Rabbit. Troutman witnesses Rambo get a gold star in Fight Club, but is unable to make contact. So they later find him living amongst a monastery in the mountains of Thailand. Troutman tells Rambo he's putting together a mercenary team to infiltrate Afghanistan in order to supply the Mujahideen rebels in their attempt to keep the Soviet army at bay. This goes exactly where you think it's going. Troutman asks Rambo to join him, and when Rambo very rightfully refuses, we get that crossing of the Rubicon moment in the Rambo franchise. Maybe First Blood Part 2 turned inward and got ugly, but the plight of POWs was, at the very least, still paid lip service. But this?
When are you going to come full circle?
What are you talking about?
You said that your war is over. Now, maybe the one out there is, but not the one inside you. I know the reasons you're here, John, but it doesn't work that way. You may try, but you can't get away from what you really are.
What do you think I am?
A full-blooded combat soldier.
Not anymore. I don't want it.
That's too bad, because you're stuck with it. We didn't make you this fighting machine. We just chipped away the rough edges. You're always going to be tearing away at yourself until you come to terms with what you are. Until you come full circle.
This is the complete shirking of responsibility of the United States government for the condition of returning veterans. And they may gussy it up by saying full-fledged combat soldier, but he means killer. And the literal implication is that Rambo and so many veterans that would face the same fate were always destined to be broken, because deep down, they are killers. All the government did was allow them to realize their deadly potential. I mean, fuck, do you remember when Troutman couldn't even pick up a phone? Thankfully, Rambo can't be negged into going into a war zone this go-round. So Troutman goes on the mission anyway. And, you guessed it.
Drop your weapon and remain where you are. You cannot escape!
Then it's a rescue movie. That's it. It's the whole movie. I in no way believe Rambo is so close to Troutman that he immediately volunteers to be airdropped into a mountainous West Asian country of which he has no experience with or knowledge of. I don't believe that the locals would reluctantly accept this man as the white savior of the Mujahideen Rebellion, nor do I believe a man whose entire identity has been defined by Vietnam would willingly jump into the fray of the Soviet Union's quote-unquote Vietnam, all while adopting and spewing conservative talking points of late Reagan-era America. But guess what? It fucking happens. It's a movie lacking the vocabulary to say anything important. Its only other interesting facet is unintentional and only revealed to us through the long lens of time. The depiction of the Mujahideen rebels is a sympathetic, if not cartoonish, portrayal. They're a proud, fiercely devout people who are fighting off foreign invaders and willing to die for their beliefs. And I believe this was true. I mean, after all, the name Mujahideen wasn't given to any one specific group, but rather a network of loosely affiliated Afghan opposition groups. But I also believe, holding two true ideas in my head simultaneously, that certain remnants of the Mujahideen rebels, after years of deadly infighting and following a failure to establish a central government, would later regroup in the form of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Both were born out of a conflict that we directly and indirectly meddled in. And I think it's fitting for a franchise that started out about the consequences of ignoring a problem until it's too late, would find itself depicting the beginning of a future problem that we would once again ignore for the sake of protecting our current interests. There's zero dramatic stakes in this film. Every beat you expect to happen will happen. The end of the film finds Rambo and Troutman a little beat up, but alive, and we get this final exchange.
Hard to believe, John. What's that, sir? Well, I hate to admit it, but the truth is I think we're getting soft.
Maybe just a little, sir. Just a little.
It's a film that made me yearn for First Blood Part 2, because even though that was bad, jingoistic, and, ridiculous, it was never boring, and at least in the most eye-rollingly way possible, tried to put a salient point at the end of the film. Rambo 3 reduces Rambo to a joke, but at least he came full circle.
Fuck, this was so bad.
Rambo 3 rightfully killed any and all momentum the franchise had, and the headband and crossbow would be put up on the wall to lay dormant for 20 years. Until...
Who are you, boatman? Where'd you learn to kill like that?
You're not going anywhere.
With Rambo, both franchise and character, laying low for 2 decades, his return brought with it an abundance of opportunities. The opportunity to introduce a new generation to the eponymous war hero, the opportunity to look back on and reckon with its legacy, and perhaps the opportunity to give a proper resolution to the story of John Rambo. The 4th film in the franchise and the first in 20 years is a film at war with itself. It doubles down on the excessively violent and literally explosive action sequences prevalent in the sequels. It still flirts with monolithic and barbarous depictions of Asian culture, but it also makes a genuine attempt at some of the more pensive moments of First Blood. The story is nonsensical and kind of recycled from itself, but for the sake of continuity, let's run through it quickly. Rambo begins interestingly enough with a departure from franchise norms. We don't begin with an introduction to Rambo as a character, but rather the introduction of the conflict he will soon get embroiled in. Media coverage and archival footage flash on screen, informing the audience of the international crisis unfolding in Burma. The opening scene then cuts to present-day Burma, as we see soldiers pull up to a paddy field, litter it with landmines, and force civilians to cross for the militants' enjoyment. When we find Rambo...
Actually, I hate doing plot. Can we get a Pratt assist, please?
Know anything about a guy named John Rambo? Open on villagers being thrown out into a rice field, landmines blowing them up into pieces. Brawny Christians, missionaries, come to him and they're like, "Are you John Rambo?" He's like, "Yeah." And they're like, "We need you to take us upriver." And he's like, "It's a war zone up there." And they're like, "Yeah, we know. We're gonna change things." And he's like, "You bringing any weapons?" They're like, "Of course not." "Then you're not changing anything. Go home." And then they come back in a rainstorm. This time, he says, "Nope. Go home." They go home again. Bottom line, they go upriver. Does not go well.
The missionaries are attacked and taken hostage, and that's about it plot-wise. And the leader of the church shows up and informs Rambo the missionaries have gone missing and asks Rambo to lead his group of private mercenaries upriver. No idea why this guy has a group of international mercenaries at the ready. We're just gonna fucking run that red light. Rambo agrees to lead them upriver, and we meet our merry band of mercs. Refreshingly, these scenes offer us something largely absent from the series since First Blood: self-evaluation and stark criticism. We have characters embody different ideas, and both get their moment on the soapbox. It feels as if all these ideas and quote-unquote solutions are posited explicitly so as to have holes poked in their logic. If the politics of First Blood started at home, and the sequels abroad, Rambo's politics seem to think all has failed. It condemns the idea of white savior proselytizers.
What the Reverend say to you? Some shit about part of his flock going missing. I said to him, look mate, that's what you get when you go trespassing into fucking Burma. That's what you get when you go sniffing around other people's garbage.
It directly addresses the military-industrial complex.
You know those generals in there making millions, cranking out meth more than any other place on the fucking planet. Bullshit. Millions, moron.
It even has a character take the side of the missionaries.
It's noble, Lewis. You what? Those people going in there with no weapons, just books and meds. It's noble. Aye.
It never approaches the level of First Blood in its examination of underlying issues, but also never succumbs to the simplicity of us and them, good guy, bad guy.
Except it kinda does.
In the second half of the film, more or less becomes what all Rambo sequels become. There is unambiguous evil. There is a clear good side versus bad. The film literally puts the missionaries and Julie Benz's Sarah in particular in virginal white just to drive this point home. And what would a Rambo sequel be without some explosions? And there's a bunch of explosions. It's almost like Sly said the cost of being introspective in any form is that I get to turn this fucker up to 11. I mean, there's a scene where General Tent's army is attacking a village where they throw a child into the fire like fucking Conan throwing that witch. In fact, multiple children are killed on screen. A part of that is actually admirable because it is a reality of war that most Hollywood war films tend not to depict, seen as a line that separates war as entertainment from actual war. But it's hard to escape the feeling that this commentary was secondary, if at all intentional, to crafting an engaging action sequence and creating an unequivocal enemy. Rambo kills 254 enemies by himself, the majority of that in the final 20 minutes of the film. The final half of the movie descended into everything I hated about the Rambo sequels, but with just more.
But then this happens.
At the end of the film, Rambo surveys all the damage, the scorched earth, the mutilated bodies. He looks at Sarah, who is alive, but forever scarred. There is no Troutman to make a quip. There's no impassioned speech from Rambo. There's only the ones who survived and the damage they carry. Then we cut to a desert road where John Rambo walks past pastoral landscapes in the same green army jacket he wore in First Blood. He walks towards us in a mirrored fashion, only this time he's not walking away. For the first time in the franchise, John goes home. It's the peace the character deserves. This was Rambo coming full circle, and it was a perfect ending to an imperfect franchise. Except it wasn't.
And at last, we arrive at the pièce de résistance.
The feather in Sly's sombrero. Released in 2019, Rambo Last Blood decides to forego the hard-won piece that 08's Rambo finally provided the character in order to bring the war home. It's a halfway interesting idea, not interesting enough to retcon the obvious intended ending of the franchise, but I guess Rambo going home unscathed always felt a little bit like wish fulfillment. What does being home mean to Rambo? How does he cope with civilian life when he hasn't been a civilian in 50 years? The project hails from riveting origins. It's a film that had advertisements made before a script was locked in or a director chosen. Posters for a fifth Rambo film started to appear at the Cannes Film Festival as early as 2010, touting a 2011 release date. That release date came and went, as Sly and the studio debated which direction to take the franchise. The original pitch was to use an idea rejected for the fourth film, where Rambo fights human trafficking. But that was again rejected for lacking the essence of Rambo, which sounds like an unintelligible yet sexy potion that you would learn in year 6 at Hogwarts, but look, that's a direct quote, don't mess with me. So in search of said essence of Rambo, the next idea would be Rambo 5, The Savage Hunt, which was to be loosely based upon the novel Hunter by James Brian Huggins, just replacing its protagonist Nathaniel Hunter with one John Rambo. In the proposed film, Rambo would lead a group of elite special ops to hunt and kill a genetically engineered creature. Wait, what? This was scrapped because I guess God doesn't exist and was quickly replaced with Rambo 5, The Last Stand, which was purported to feature a small town setting and evoke First Blood vibes. This version, too, would be scrapped as Sly would go on to finish Expendables 2, leaving the fifth film in limbo once again. In 2015, Stallone and First Blood novelist David Morrell teamed up to write a new script for Rambo 5 that was described as a soulful journey and very powerful. Stallone pitched this new final film, and the studio balked, opting instead for a return to the human trafficking storyline that was now over a decade old. How did a plot that was deemed as not having the essence of Rambo back when the fourth film was in development hell, and one that was repeatedly rejected this go-around, suddenly find new life? I mean, what made Sly change his mind? What paradigm shifts in culture and polite society had we witnessed that suddenly gave this a renewed urgency or newfound relevance? I mean, it's not like there was a candidate running for higher office that made headlines for using incendiary racist rhetoric that would make this old script de rigueur, right?
They're rapists.
I tell you this long tale of Rambo development hell not to impress you, but to impress upon you that there were better options than this, including retiring the character. That was always an option, Sly. And, lest we forget, genetically engineered creatures.
You're all cowards, Hollywood.
The long and short of the plot is more or less a Cronenberg monster mash of the previous 3 sequels plots, but the twist is that this time it's on American soil. The war is on Rambo's doorstep.
Kind of.
At the beginning of the film, Rambo is alive and well. Well, alive anyway. He's living on the family horse ranch last seen in the credits of Rambo 08 with an old ranch hand friend named Maria and her granddaughter Gabriella. Rambo spends his days breaking horses in and doing fun little DIY projects like giant subterranean tunnel systems. When Gabriella goes to Mexico in search of her biological father, because, Mexicans are deadbeat dads, she's immediately sold out by a friend and sold into the human trafficking ring. When word gets back to the ranch, Rambo crosses the border to take matters into his own hands. After Gabriella goes missing, most of the film actually takes place in Mexico, where the cultural depictions are about as cringe as one might imagine. The minute we cross the border, we see all the bad hombres our newly minted president warned about. We see the criminals, the drug dealers, rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. And all these depictions are pretty criminal in my opinion, but is there a higher crime than fashion crime? I mean, Chola Chicano fashion is an advent of American Latino cultures. You wouldn't move to Mexico and then become a Cholo. This isn't fucking O. Henry, Sly. That's a little check mark for my literary dad joke. Rambo successfully hunts down the men responsible, where he is promptly surrounded, outnumbered, and given the business. They beat him within an inch of his life and let him know that his pursuit for Gabriella has actually made her life much, much worse. Rambo gets help by the seemingly one good Mexican in the entire country, Carmen Delgado, who lost her sister to the same ring of human traffickers. After having time to convalesce at Carmen's place, Rambo returns to a brothel in search of Gabriella and kills many men until he finds her drugged and unresponsive. The drive home is supposed to be a thesis statement of sorts for Rambo.
I was lost, man. And then I met you. And I saw something that I didn't think I'd ever see anymore. Good in this world.
And all is going to plan until Gabriella suddenly dies from her injuries. And now, with his way to view good in the world gone, Rambo prepares for a total war. He hunts, finds, and beheads one of the leaders of the traffic ring, and then prepares the ranch for a final stand. Then we get about 30 minutes of Rambo just doing Rambo shit. He kills people, nearly gets killed. It's all pretty rinse and repeat. It's a more fucked up version of Home Alone.
Be a good little fella now and open the door.
I said at the beginning that there's something interesting about exploring what's next for the veteran, whether you can never actually come home. The beginning of the film shows PTSD visualized for the first time since First Blood. It shows Rambo taking medications throughout. And a part of me hoped that this would be a more honest examination of the quotidian struggles of veterans, rather than an extraordinary event our character must react to. If I wrote a Rambo 5, I'd probably make it about Rambo struggling to go to the goddamn bank or holding up a Walmart with a hunting rifle because his medications confused him. I'd make it about the toll that trauma takes on a person, that it takes on a family, on a community. But instead, we get a xenophobic story about how bad Mexicans are, one that all but shrugs and says build the wall, and insult to injury ends with some of the worst impulses of the franchise. But we do get this.
I want you to feel my rage, my hate,
fist and rip out your heart like you did mine.
And you're like, Sly, look, you've never been a wordsmith, but I guess getting your heart ripped out is something that we can all understand metaphorically. Even a child. Like, a child watching a cartoon would understand that. And after all, this was a cartoon, so maybe it stands to reason that you have to watch these films with cartoon logic. But wait, whoa! And I'm not even going to bullshit you. I laughed hysterically at this. It embraced its B-movie potential with aplomb. There are large-scale detonations of explosives and military-grade weapons fired on American soil. And I know he lives in the middle of nowhere, but, you know, domestic terrorism tends to get noticed even in the red states. Although, why am I complaining? At least they took the domestic terrorist victory lap. I mean, that's definitely the part of First Blood that you want to emulate. Having literally ripped the heart out of the enemy, Rambo hobbles back to his front porch and sits in his father's rocking chair. The sun is setting behind the mountains and the skies are pink and gold. Then we get this.
I tried to come home, but I never really arrived. A part of my mind and soul got lost along the way. But my heart was still here, where I was born, where I would defend to the end.
It almost reads as a call to arms, but not in the way that First Blood felt like a call to arms to provide help for the vulnerable. More in line with First Blood Part 2's reckless endorsement of radical vigilantism.
So what's my point?
This film goes to great lengths to try to connect itself thematically to First Blood. The name feels like a call and response. Advertising made sure to evoke the connection as often as possible. Director Adrian Grunberg referred to the film as a closing of the circle. But its greatest similarity serves to highlight the larger disparity between them.
They both share an American setting.
Through 4 films in 35 years, Rambo in some way, shape, or form has been othered. In First Blood, although on his home soil, he's still made to feel alien and unwelcome. It's a perfect encapsulation of what Margaret Atwood describes as my home ground, foreign territory, which feels like a simple yet incredibly apt description for how returning veterans must feel. The second, third, and fourth film are all set in foreign countries where Rambo is literally othered by geography. In Last Blood, Rambo is returned to the land of the free. But unlike First Blood, which took the opportunity to be self-critical and ask what the cost of that freedom is, Rambo 5 chooses instead to relinquish any and all responsibility for American failures, opting for ethnic scapegoating in the guise of entertainment. And again, there is an interesting story about an othered war veteran returning home and having to other someone else to understand his place, but this ain't it, Chief.
Could still say that, right? What do you mean it's racist?
Rambo perseveres. But does he really? In the final moments, he's all alone. His life is irrevocably altered. The man literally blows up his own home, defending it to the end. Sound familiar?
This is now effectively a riot.
1349 hours declaring it a riot.
And this was the single trenchant political observation made by this film, and it was done so on accident. Whether it's Rambo blowing up the family ranch or insurrectionists storming the halls of the Capitol, the result of this inherently mistrustful, fear-mongered worldview is to leave the very thing you claim to love the most in shambles. And this isn't just me. Remember David Morrell, the novelist who created John Rambo? He was reportedly not a fan, telling Newsweek,
I felt degraded and dehumanized after I left the theater. Instead of being soulful, this new movie lacks one. I felt I was less a human being for having seen it, and today, that's an unfortunate message.
I know I'm new to this, but it's usually not a good sign when the creator of a character no longer recognizes the character.
Anyway, I know I've been going on for some time now, and I apologize. Look, I didn't ask to be born, and I definitely didn't ask for another Rambo film. But oddly, it's with this final film that the radicalization of the veteran comes into greater focus. How does a veteran, someone espousing what we now consider liberal policies, begin their journey out of selflessness, act with the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people in mind, only to turn into an agent for diametrically opposed views? It begins with the mistreatment displayed in First Blood. It continues with treacherous portrayals and othering of the sequels, and it ends with a binary worldview, us and them. And in that way, Last Blood does close the circle. So let's do the same. In the spirit of closing the circle, let's return to the tranquil lakeside with Rambo. I started here because it reminded me of a simpler time. I wanted to feel the creature comforts of childhood, the kind of security one only feels when they're a child. Looking at it now, I'm reminded of the final scene in Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. The troops march on as dark silhouettes into the night. The only luminescence is of the burning buildings and scorched landscapes in the distance. The soldiers are shrouded in darkness so that they remain indistinguishable from one another. And then they begin to sing that old Mickey Mouse song. Until we cut to this shot, and finally we see familiar characters.
I am so happy that I am alive, in one piece.
And all at once you realize that these are kids, maybe 18 or 19. I know Matthew Modine has looked 57 since he was born, but for the first time I think the spell is broken. They're children, half a world away, exhausted, terrified, and with blood on their hands. And all they want is the security of childhood, the warm milk of nostalgia. The appeal of that is that when you're a child, the comfort comes from not having to have further examinations. You can look at a cartoon as a cartoon, and not as a tool for propaganda or hate speech. Well, Disney's been on the right side of propaganda before. Wait, is there a right side? They've also definitely been on the wrong side of hate speech. Wait, again, is there a right side? And when these troops sing a song from their childhood, they're singing for all that comes with it. A childhood corrupted before it even began. Rambo Force of Freedom debuted in September of 1986, 11 months after Ashley Babbitt was born. There's no evidence that Ashley Babbitt watched the show. There's no suggestion that she engaged with Rambo in any medium. I'm not saying that she ever yearned for a return to the simple pleasures of Rambo Force of Freedoms, but I can tell you that after the Capitol riots, I did. After the riots, I began to feel what Emily Dickinson refers to as the deepening menace of death, a special kind of melancholy. I couldn't keep the images of January 6th from my mind. I couldn't stop seeing Ashley's body go limp and fall, not even when I closed my eyes. Earlier this year, on my 31st birthday, I was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder. But, not the cool fictional kind that helps you solve murders or have the cleanest apartment in New York City. Fucking Monica. My OCD manifested itself as intrusive thoughts and ruminative spirals, or as I like to call it, an infinite green light for all your fucking nightmares. I realize now that I've suffered from some form of this for many, many years, but its pronouncement grew more apparent after the riots. And not to be a myopic asshole or make someone's death about me, but I wouldn't have been compelled to write this if not for what happened to Ashley Babbitt. Not because of how she died, but because of how she lived. I know it's tempting to reduce her down to radical tweets and conspiratorial thinking, because I've been tempted to do so. It's much simpler to think of her as a domestic terrorist who deserved to die. But when we do that, it's because we crave the simplicity of that narrative. We become just as guilty of dehumanization as the many central figures of authority in the film franchise, because it's easier than doing an honest accounting. It's much harder to take the totality of someone's life not in the public eye and judge them versus the one unprecedented event that will forever be etched into U.S. history. Instead, if there's one call to action, hope, or aspiration for this, it's that we resist simple narratives. Don't be afraid to live in the uncomfortable realities of how contradictory humans can be. And just to be clear, this is in no way an apologist video. Ashley Babbitt died a criminal in the midst of a criminal act. She is no martyr. She's not a symbol or a hero. But she was a person. And I know what it's like to believe with all your heart that something is happening to you and around you when it's not. I've spent a year living in the uncomfortable reality that a person can be a victim and a villain at the same time. And that is one mighty uncomfortable reality to live in. But at least we get to live in it. This video was written and performed by me, Christian Torres, produced by Hunter Gurney, edited by Hunter Gurney and myself, additional editing by Matt Lyons, lighting and sound by Maya Blades and Lewis Gayton, graphic design by Emily Mosier. Special thanks to Martin Thomas of Double Toasted, Greg Alba and John Humphrey from The Real Rejects, and Daniel Escalante. And if you want to keep the fire burning, please visit us at patreon.com/a little fire burning.